This program has been brought to you thanks to the generous contributions of our patrons on Patreon. Your patronage is greatly appreciated. And for more content like this, be sure to check out the Modern Alchemist channel on Patreon.
Shall we begin? Let's begin now.
Welcome to the Modern Alchemist channel. I'm Aubrey Forrest, the Modern Alchemist, and this is Ask an Alchemist. Today, we're going to be addressing the questions regarding whether or not it is in fact the age of Aquarius, and how would we know, and what are the signs, and what would it mean to be in the age of Aquarius. To begin with, there's a lot of confusion. If you go online, if you start researching this out yourself, there's a great deal of confusion regarding what time scale to use, and the basis of the thing upon which that time scale is based, and specifically it has to do with a point of reference. So there's one group of people who are utilizing a binary star approach, wherein this time scale isn't necessarily on the point of reference of us going around the galactic center in one complete revolution per se, but instead is based on our conjunctive orbit with another star, and so we're going through a series of cycles in that way. The secondary method is one which is simply tracking the orbit of our sun around the galactic center, which takes about 26,000 years. So we're looking either at a time scale that's 24,000 years, which is divided into 2,000-year increments or ages, or we're looking at a time scale which is 26,000 years, utilizing 2,160-year increments. Now, I've resolved this for myself, and it's a component of the Saturn key. In fact, understanding that both of these points of reference are actually accurate from a point of view, you can then determine what the truth of it probably is. But without getting into all of that, without actually having to do any of that, how else could you determine if it was in fact a Saturnian age, or the age of Aquarius? Aquarius being ruled by Saturn. Well, the best way to do it is the way I learned how to do it when I was a child living in Europe. If you want to know what time it is, you ask somebody who knows, if you don't happen to have a watch on you or you don't see a clock visible anywhere. So the way to ask who knows and is to simply observe often what people are doing. So let's say you get into a city and you suddenly notice that everyone stops about midday and they begin to start eating. So you would suppose it's probably lunchtime, right? And as the sun is slowing down and getting to a setting point in the late afternoon, people seem to all go home. So without actually knowing what specific time it is, you can tell what time it is just by observing what everyone is doing, okay? In the same context, all we have to do then is observe ourselves. Look at what we're teaching ourselves in popular culture, in movies today, in music today, how our law enforcement is clad today, the prevailing colors and attitudes that are being taught today, and understand specifically, in order to know what age you're in, all you really need to know at this point are what were the attributes for the age of Pisces, and what are the attributes for the age of Aquarius, which are the ruling planets, and what are the qualities that would be engendered by those planets which are ruling. All right? So now that I've laid the foundation for you guys, you'll understand that while it is really fun to go through and break down the sidereal astronomical and astrological correspondences, that may not necessarily be necessary. Now, there are two additional things that we need to consider when looking around us, okay, in practical terms. And the one thing we need to consider is, are they actually acting authentically? In other words, are people genuinely going to lunch because they're hungry and it's time to eat? Or are they doing it because they're trying to fool some people into thinking that it's lunchtime when it's actually maybe not lunchtime, right? In the same context, you can ask yourself, are all of the world governments stepping in line into what I believe would be a Saturnian age by unifying under a unified authority, right? Are they doing this to kind of fool us? Or are they doing this because this is a component of the new age, which they know now, if they direct energies towards that end, will be successful? Whereas if you're in a previous age and you try to initiate some kind of Saturnian policies, you would be thwarted, which is what happened throughout the age of Pisces, right? So what we're going to do is we're going to break down these ages, and we're going to look at first the age of Pisces, and we're going to see specifically what the age of Pisces entails, what it means to you and to me, what were the symbols that were used during that age, when did it begin, and when could we expect it to end. Okay, let's talk about the age of Pisces. In my opinion, we are coming out of the age of Pisces. The qualities and attributes of the age of Pisces are these. Its element is water. It is ruled by the planet Jupiter. Its metal is pewter, which is a combination of lead and tin. And lead is the element for Saturn, and tin is the element for Jupiter. So it shows, it gives you the metal itself, the metallurgical symbol itself, gives you a sense of the quality of that type of Jupiter at that point, which and that kind of era, which is a unification of liberty, but liberty under law, right? And Jupiter and the energy around Jupiter is expansive, so governments and populations would be expanding. Imperialism, breaking out and moving into the world, conquering new frontiers, all of that is part of the age of Jupiter. Also, Jupiter is associated with Jove and Jehovah, which means that we spent the last 2,000 years baptizing people in the name of Jesus, right? Which is tied again to the age of Pisces, which is why most Christians probably don't realize it, but the fish on the back of their car is not only a Vesica Pisces, but the idea of it being a Vesica Pisces, Pisces being the fish, it is an emblem of the age wherein we're residing for the last couple thousand years. So those qualities, the Old West, the Wild Wild West, is a great example of the age of Pisces, where there are conflicting forces of good and evil. The Middle Ages has a lot of those qualities. As with the symbol of Pisces, you'll have two ideas or ideals working about each other until one comes on top and the other's on the bottom, you know. One rises to the surface and becomes the prevailing dogma, and the other is either hidden away and kept in secret, you know, kept alive but in secret in the underground, or is extinguished entirely. So these are all the kinds of things that we have experienced over the last couple of years going through the age of Pisces. Now, here's the question. The question is zero common era actually the start point of an age of any name, like Pisces or whatever? And by that I mean, is that an accurate date whereby we can agree is the start point of an age? Now, most people agree upon that. I have a slightly different view. My view is that it's very possible that the age of Pisces started as much as 100 or 200 years before the Common Era. And I base that by looking at the advent and diminishment of certain scriptural writings. Usually when you have the development of one set of scripture and the diminishment of another, you have a transition. Something different happened. In this case, by 445 BCE, Common Era, the last words in the Old Testament were written. This was the end of the prophets, which to me means that the celestial spheres had finally settled down to the degree that there was no longer anything of significance to report. At the same time, within the 5th century, Buddhism begins to rise out of Hinduism within Southeast Asia. Something happened, something transitioned, something changed. It is very likely then, 400 years later, when it was agreed upon, because we looked up and we saw that nothing else had changed, that the good news of Jesus Christ, in other words, that the star in the heavens had become crucified and fixed within a settled point where we were now safe. That's actually the gospel. That's the good news. When you look at it from that standpoint, you realize, oh yes, and then every discussion within the New Testament is a discussion on the stabilizing force, the narrative, spoken one more time to remind the reader, yes, we went through a hard time and now the hard time is resolved because the stability had been achieved. The star was Mithras Sol Invictus. It had conquered all of the challenges and left us in a stable sphere where we could now grow without any external mess-ups anymore. No more planetary discharges, no more massive havoc. This is it, you guys. It's a big misreading in Scripture when people expect the end times to be all destructive right now. It's not going to be anything like that. This is going to be a gradual, nice transition to peace. The question we have to ask ourselves in the age of Aquarius is, what kind of peace do we have? Because that's the question that keeps being asked of us in the modern age. So those are the qualities and attributes of the age that we have just passed through, in my opinion. Because I see the start point as being somewhat earlier than what we are saying relative to what you can witness as the catalog of sacred writing develops in association with electromagnetic dynamics and planetary forces in the heavens above. Okay? So, age of Aquarius then could well be right now. If you move it back, even if you're using the celestial method of 1,100 or 2,160 years, then we've like rolled right over the top of it. But how would we know, right? Let's say our clock is broken, but we know that the people who are operating the governments, and you understand that this is so big, the global governance is so big, and there is so much of it, that there are components of it where things are timed to correspond with certain events, and the timing is important. It's important because we're magnetic, and it's often nice to synchronize yourself like a surfer with the wave that's coming, right? Ride that wave and ride it successfully into the shore. So, let's take a look at the age of Aquarius then. All right. So what are the qualities of the age of Aquarius? Well, Aquarius is ruled by Saturn. And the metal for the age of Aquarius, the metal for the sign Aquarius, and this is one thing that's really interesting to me. The metal is uranium. I know, right? Go get a wedding ring made out of that. Not. So we're going to come back to this. But this is one of the most telling points, actually, the metal of the age of Aquarius being uranium and what has happened in the 20th century. But we're going to come right back to that. What are the other qualities of the age of Aquarius? Well, a Saturnian age will be a conclusion to warfare. There will be no more war. Where in the previous 4,000 years we had the age of Pisces, which was ruled by Jupiter. So there's a war power right there, but the method of war is to establish order. And then prior to that, there was the age of Aries, which was ruled by Mars. Again, the other eye of Horus going on there. This then would be a war to suppress and crush and organize and unify, which is where you get your Alexanders the Great and your Caesars. And these people came on the scene at just exactly the right time, because that's when everyone would have expected them to arrive, which is why when Alexander the Great rolled into Egypt, there was no contest. They looked at him, they said, oh, look, blonde hair, here's a conquering hero. Yeah, it's that time. And they just knew that this was the coming age. Well, I believe that we use the same techniques today, and that these techniques can be utilized to tell what time it is. So what else is going on? Well, the order, the established order, where in Jupiter it was all expansion, 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 which is what we saw, right? That's all the history of our country in America here. This country is written in blood and expansion. That's our history. That's our heritage today. Is that, and so I'm glad that we're done with that. What's to come of it then? Peace. But the peace is going to come at a cost. Where in the age of Pisces, ruled by Jupiter, liberty is tantamount, right? It's everything. You want absolute liberty. In the age of Aquarius, under Saturn, liberty takes a second seat to order. And this component, just understanding this component alone, and how many times we keep seeing this come up again and again and again, and how often we've seen it. In fact, my earliest recollection of seeing liberty taking a back seat to order was in the mid-1980s with Frank Miller's Dark Knight, where Superman is sent out to go put Batman in his place, which is sort of ironic to use a symbol for Jupiter to suppress Saturn as a vigilante. It's beautifully written. I could go on forever about that comic. It's just absolute masterpiece. But the lesson here has then been carried on into every single movie relating to superpowered beings and every single show relating to spies. Think about it now. In the last 10 years, we had Mission Impossible Rogue Nation. And what is the theme? That you need more oversight. We can't have you guys running around and blowing shit up all the time. The Dawn of Justice. What's that about? Hey, we really can't tolerate superpowered people walking around and doing things because it's disorderly and it's destructive. Saturn won't have it. You know, which is why I was so disappointed in how Batman behaved, driving and mowing down everyone and blowing stuff up, because that's not what a compassionate being does. That just wasn't. It was a bad portrayal, I think, of Batman. In the most recent movie, Captain America: Civil War, which I'll talk about at length in another video, but briefly, the entire plot line there is: will you sign the Sokovia Accords? Will you do as you are told, you superpowered person? Can we trust you? Now, Saturn doesn't trust anyone. Saturn trusts the law, which means that Saturn will use the tools of the law as a means of coercing obedience. And that's the society we live in now, right? So Saturn then is a surveillance society where everyone is being monitored. Everyone's being kept an eye on. Right? Well, that's what we live in right now. We're rapidly moving into that, and London is by far the most heavily surveilled city on the planet. And considering the tone that comes out of that particular city and is set for everyone else as it spreads outward, and Paris as well, it's really quite revelatory when you think about it. But this is now the condition. Now, one of the other things to look for in a Saturnian age would be a shifting of colors within your authority figures. So instead of police officers being clad in blue, which is a color for Jupiter, they're clad in black, which is a color for Saturn. Think about it. Tactical attire. That's what it's called now. Doesn't really break my heart because it helps me look slimmer, right? Black is very slimming. I have most of my wardrobe looks like that. But in terms of corporate America, you're seeing a transition in this as well. Red Robins recently just dropped all of their colorful attire, and now everyone's wearing black shirts. And you'll see that a lot of corporate casual attire is going to be relegated to the darker tones, but more specifically, probably you'll see a lot more black showing up. What does that mean? That means that the people who are operating their businesses at the highest level, the people who are organizing governments and approving the sale of new equipment, including uniforms, the people who are saying now is the time to wear this color, they all seem to know what time it is. And to them, it's the age of Aquarius. They're acting like it's the age of Aquarius, and they're acting like it's been moving into that age for some time. But is there like a slam dunk? Is there something that we could just pull out and say, yeah, for sure, like we entered into that age? Well, let's go back to uranium. Uranium is the, or has been the preferred element for nuclear fission. And it was the element which was selected by the Pentagon in 1945 over the arguments of an alternative, which was cheaper and safer and easier to use. They decided to go with uranium. If you'd like to know more about this controversy, check out the thorium debate. Thorium debate, just Google that, and you'll find that it is going to be a wealth of information, especially in context with this. Because we could still be using thorium, except for thorium is not the metal that I guess you want to pepper planet Earth with, right? Now, where else do we use uranium other than as fissile material for nuclear weapons? We use uranium in depleted uranium shells, and we have been using that for a 10-year conflict over there, right, in the Middle East. And we have absolutely salted the earth over there. It is as if we might as well have lit off nuclear weapons fire over there, because the birth defects and the degree of radiation in the soil and everything else is horrendous. It's you can feel free to look that up on Google as well. Definitely you'll want to steel yourself to it, because the images are graphic and the stories are heartrending. So, but it's definitely something to consider. The other piece of evidence I want to offer you is this. I found an animation online of the nuclear test detonations and the two actual detonations used in a conflict, Hiroshima and Nagasaki, over the span of the 20th century. So you start in 1945, and then we move straight through to the year 2000. And I'm going to show you this video. I've sped it up quite a bit so that you can see it. On the top of the screen, you'll see there's a series of flags which will begin to appear. And these flags indicate which country, and the number next to the flag is how many bombs they've done, lit off, fired. In the upper right-hand corner of your screen, you'll see that there's the date by month and year. And in the lower right-hand corner, in red, you'll see there's the total missile count. Okay? So now that you know what to look forward to, let's take a look at that video for a moment and see what the 20th century had to hold for us. Okay, so here we are. This is the United States, and it's 1945. It's July 1945, and that is the first detonation of a nuclear weapon, Los Alamos, New Mexico. And now we're going to Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And these are the only two nuclear weapons of fissile-grade material which have ever been discharged in a conflict. Of course, as I said earlier, the fact that we didn't actually discharge a nuclear bomb in the Middle East is irrelevant, given the degree to which the ground has been saturated by depleted uranium shells. Okay, so now we're moving on into the rest of the world, and you can see that the United States began testing nuclear weapons in the South Pacific. One thing that you might want to consider is this, and I enjoy taking this perspective often when I'm looking at historical material. The easiest way to divorce myself from an ethnocentric perspective, one driven culturally, like by my historical standpoint, meaning here and now, is to pretend that I'm a time traveler, which of course is completely appropriate for the age of Aquarius, right? And as a time traveler, I'm now looking at this and I'm saying, wow, we're sure testing a lot of nuclear bombs. Is this really testing? In other words, we're already approaching 100 detonations, and it's not even 1960 yet. Just how often does one need to test if your bomb is still working, right? We have 3 nuclear powers on the table at this point, and all of them are avidly test firing their bombs. Why? What is taking place here? Well, obviously, all this material is discharging into the atmosphere because not all of these were subsurface detonations. Many of them were stratospheric detonations of nuclear weapons. And that then dispersed radioactive material as clouds and particulates all across the planet. Also, we have Chernobyl to take into account. There's not a single human being on the face of the earth that doesn't have a little bit of Chernobyl in them at this point because of how much radiation was discharged into the atmosphere. And let's not forget Fukushima and what it's doing to the Pacific Ocean and everyone who's eating food that's coming out of the Pacific Ocean, or anyone who's living in the Pacific Ocean, swimming, surfing, what have you. They're all getting a little bit of Fukushima in them as well. You can see, if I was a time traveler looking at this, I would think that there was a war going on. Now, the question one might ask is, a war with whom? A Doctor Who fan, I'm a Doctor Who fan. My favorite, one of my favorite early quotes is in season 1 of Doctor Who when Christopher Eccleston first picks up Rose, and he looks at her and he says, "You people, you have no idea. There's a war going on beneath your feet, and you're more interested in fish and chips than football." And you hollow earthers out there, and those of you who are all about the reptilian conspiracy, well, here's your ammunition, folks. Here's over 2,000 nuclear detonations when we finish this up between 1945 and the year 2000. That's a lot of nuclear detonations. I mean, that is a lot of nuclear detonations. I want that just to sink in for just a second here. Realize 1977, I was in junior high at that point, and we had put off 1,460 nuclear bombs by then. It is just absolutely incredible. And now, of course, we've introduced 2 more nuclear powers, Pakistan and India, to the team, and everyone is just lighting them off like they got a job to do. From a historical standpoint, again, if let's say you're going back in time and you're looking at this, I would say, just objectively speaking, that this was not a Cold War, that there was some kind of other thing going on, and that these people were just crazy people with the number of nuclear weapons that they were discharging everywhere. Why? Why would you do this? Well, a simple answer is, of course, Age of Aquarius, and this literally is baptizing the entire planet Earth in fire. Nuclear fire. No question about it. Granted, not all of these weapons were made out of uranium, some were made out of plutonium, but the point of the matter is Imagine Dragons and their song Radioactive, quite appropriate because we are radioactive to a degree, and to me, that definitely is the biggest hint, the biggest clue that we've entered the age of Aquarius, given the fact that uranium is the element designated for the zodiac sign of Aquarius. All right, so there you go. That's super impressive, right? That's just crazy. So, all right, let's continue on then. Okay, the next piece of evidence that I want to offer in support of this being the age of Aquarius, or that we've moved into the age of Aquarius, comes from the mouth of our own world leaders. In 1991, on September 11th, 1991, George Herbert Walker Bush got in front of the House and Senate and delivered a speech, which was an address to Saddam Hussein's entry into Kuwait, and also a declaration that this event, Saddam Hussein's invasion of Kuwait, was exactly the instance we needed in order to step forward with the establishment of a new world order. So this is that speech. I've cut down all the other stuff, and I just presented for you the one segment where George Bush is actually talking specifically about the challenges of establishing New World Order. You really want to watch this, especially since this is literally 10 years, given 10 years on the day prior to the September 11th, which changed everything for everyone everywhere in 2001. So take a look at this clip, and then I'll be right back with you with the final piece of evidence.
A new partnership of nations has begun, and we stand today at a unique and extraordinary moment. The crisis in the Persian Gulf, as grave as it is, also offers a rare opportunity to move toward an historic period of cooperation. Out of these troubled times, our fifth objective, a new world order, can emerge, a new era, freer from the threat of terror, stronger in the pursuit of justice, and more secure in the quest for peace. An era in which the nations of the world, East and West, North and South, can prosper and live in harmony. 100 generations have searched for this elusive path to peace, while 1,000 wars raged across the span of human endeavor. And today that new world is struggling to be born. A world quite different from the one we've known. A world where the rule of law supplants the rule of the jungle. A world in which nations recognize the shared responsibility for freedom and justice. A world where the strong respect the rights of the weak. This is the vision that I shared with President Gorbachev in Helsinki. He and other leaders from Europe, the Gulf, and around the world understand that how we manage this crisis today could shape the future for generations to come. The test we face is great, and so are the stakes. This is the first assault on the new world that we seek, the first test of our mettle. Had we not responded to this first provocation with clarity of purpose, if we do not continue to demonstrate our determination, it would be a signal to actual and potential despots around the world. America and the world must defend common vital interest, and we will. America and the world must support the rule of law, and we will. America and the world must stand up to aggression, and we will. And one thing more, in the pursuit of these goals, America will not be intimidated.
Okay, the last piece of evidence I want to offer you is this, and this is perhaps the funnest piece of evidence of them all, and that is Saturn rules time. And so if you wanted to tell stories that would honor the coming age or the current age or inaugurate it in some way, what would you do? You'd tell time travel stories. And in fact, the first time travel story that was written was done so by H.G. Wells in 1895. And he wrote The Time Machine then. That was his first story. And that inaugurated the 20th century, that book. Now, one thing that's interesting about Herbert George Wells is the reason why he preferred going by H.G., I'm told, is because H.G. is also the designation for the element of mercury. And as we know, Mercury is the messenger of the gods. So, as H.G. Wells, the stories that he tells then function as his heraldry for the coming age. And so it is with the Time Machine. And so it has been with Gene Roddenberry's work in Star Trek, which is just riddled like Swiss cheese with time-traveling stories from top to bottom. So it has been with time travel stories in Twilight Zone and Outer Limits and Time Tunnel. I mean, I honestly, I could go on probably for a half an hour just rattling off movies and shows, and just books, comic books, regular books, magazines, talking about time travel. We have obsessed with time travel stories in the 20th century, and we continue to obsess about them today. And I mean, X-Men: Days of Future Past, right? So that to me is probably the most fun indication that we are in fact in the age of Aquarius. So what does it mean? What does this mean? What does it mean to be in the age of Aquarius? Well, those of us, like I said, who like to wear black will be in style for the next few thousand years. Unlike other ages, the age of Aquarius and the age of Capricorn are both ruled by Saturn, which means Saturn gets the unique distinction of being on the board for 4,000 years, or for 4,320 years, right? So either way you want to look at it, Saturn gets to play and gets to operate things for a considerable amount of time. And to many, many would declare that the coming Saturnian age is something to be really looked forward to. It's going to be a good time, but here's the deal: we have a choice, and I am certain that this has been the prevailing obsession in science fiction that discusses like post-Holocaust worlds or the future worlds or what the potential is. We have the potential of being a world, like Star Trek, for instance, because that is the ultimate Saturnian age, what is presented in Star Trek. We have the option of being that, where we are all in it for each other, and the goal is to become the greatest you possibly can, so that all are elevated with you, right? All ships rise with the tide, and so as you prevail, everyone else prevails. Personally, I abide in that. I like that philosophy. I like that as one prevails, all can prevail with them if they're a team. And I find that exciting. So that's one option. The other option is dark, because Saturn is not afraid of the dark. Saturn is not afraid of laying the smack down and doing the soft kill. And that's the cautionary note. That's the thing that all of our movies and books and television and everything, it's all leading up to that. It's saying you have a choice, and we need to get on board with this and make this choice, and we need to choose responsible freedom, right? We're done with the Old West. It's very clear with that, and we're done with the age of Pisces, which is why you see so many religions which were centered around that age languishing and perishing on the vine, because the energy which was sustaining that is now gone, and it's collapsing on its own corruption. It's collapsing inward on its own corruption. So a new something will be coming. A new faith is obviously going to be emerging. A new method of thinking is coming, because Aquarius rules air, and that's all about thinking and about communication. And that's the domain that we're moving into. The information age certainly is another indication of the age of Aquarius, right? Holding things in clouds. I love the imagery. All of that is telling. So, welcome to the age of Aquarius. We're right here at the threshold, and what we do with it will impact our children's 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 children for a very, very long time. I would hope that we could come to a point where in this coming age, or in the development of this age, that we move past our petty bickering and see each other for something far greater than we have in the past. Recognize our kinship here on the earth, and that yeah, sure, this may be how I look now, but next incarnation could be entirely different, and it's about time we realize that we are sharing this world in every possible way, and it's time to recognize the beauty of that and unify under that idea. That's definitely something that the Age of Aquarius speaks to. Which is why in the song they talk about when Mars and Jupiter align, no longer are these two ideals in conflict because they're reconciled under Saturn. All right. Well, that's it. Thank you for another series of really good questions. These are actually super fun to answer because they're so easy. This particular one, because you really only need to look out with your eyeballs. And with regard to the dating, you have the flexibility to realize that zero start point date does not necessarily mean that that's also the zero start point date for that age. That date may well have started a couple hundred years earlier. And if that's the case, then that absolutely explains the rapidity of this transition that we're experiencing now. A transition in tolerance, a transition in compassion, and a transition into understanding. Yeah, that's the Age of Aquarius, and it's going to be a beautiful, beautiful time. So, thank you. I'm Aubrey Forrest, the Modern Alchemist, and I will be talking to you guys soon.